Hi, folks. This is Jason Pramis with the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, and I'm also editor of the Somerville Wire. And thought I'd have a chat with Marc Levy, the editor of of Cambridge Day, about a matter that just popped up this week that we both thought it would be worth sort of discussing in the public interest. Quickly, a dead body was found in Davis Square a couple days ago. Today is Friday, May 13th. So that was Wednesday, May 11th. Is that right, Mark? Early, in the morning, outside in Davis Square, outside JP Licks and 7-Eleven, which for those of you that don't know the area well is an area where there's lots of homeless folks, unhoused folks, as people say these days. So it's an area where, in addition to just people coming to visit the businesses, people going to the tea, stuff like that, there's also people that kind of hang out there all the time. So with that as a background, there was a dead body found there. And this is not a common occurrence in Somerville, Massachusetts. Seemed like something that would be worthy of reporting. And so I'll just let Mark take it from there. So what happened, Mark? Was there any reporting?
There was not. I was actually sent a photo distressingly late. The photo had been taken at 8:09 a.m. and the person thought to send it to me 13 hours later or something like that.
Okay.
So obviously my first step was to go to the wires, check the internet and see, well, what was this? And my guess was it was probably not necessarily something that we'd report upon a lot. If it was just an overdose, that's different from it being a murder, for instance. Right. And I was surprised to find out that there was no reporting on it. Right. And I think that was in part because the city hadn't put anything out about it. There was no police log. There was no tweet from the Somerville Police Department. There was nothing on the website. There was nothing on the city website. And it's like, that's odd, I thought. So I tried to contact the police, and the city spokesperson, Denise Taylor, left messages, couldn't get through, finally went to the police department and was told that the police department, the staff that was on duty at the time, didn't know anything and couldn't tell me anything if they did.
And why couldn't they tell you anything?
Because the information has to go through Denise Taylor and be vetted by a lawyer, as far as Watch Commander Lieutenant Michael Holland told me. Okay.
So is it customary, and I say this as editor of a Somerville publication, is it customary for people to drop dead in Davis Square? Is this something that, just happens all the time? It's not worthy of comment, and we might, we might not expect the city or the cops to say something about it,
It is unusual. Hopefully finding a body in a public space will always be unusual. We had one commenter who seemed to suggest that there were dead bodies popping up all over the place in Central Square in Cambridge. Right. And it was unnoteworthy and handled as a police log entry.
So the police do log it in Cambridge, but do they log it in Somerville as well?
Exactly. That was
one would think, right, that it will be logged.
Right. Not only is Davis Square not Central Square, and bodies are unusual there, but there is in Cambridge a public information officer for the police who is generally accessible at all hours, especially when something remarkable has happened, and it is logged. And in addition, there may occasionally be, a press release issued about it to reassure the public, possibly.
It's kind of an overstatement, I think. I mean, I lived in Cambridge 25 years, and I've been in Somerville for a year and a half. That just Central Square is littered with dead bodies. I think that might be a bit much. Right?
I think so.
And I still think it's news, right? When somebody dies, kind of in, not in a hospital bed, whatever, just in the street. There's any number of angles that an enterprising reporter can take with it.
Right.
So why wasn't there any coverage? Like, I can say for us, like we just don't have the bandwidth with the Somerville Wire. We're acting as a small news service, basically. We're trying to serve local independent publications like the Somerville Times or Cambridge Day, Dig Boston, that I also help run. We're not here. We don't have the staff at all to do this kind of stuff. Also, we're not, typically what are called ambulance chasers. Usually we leave this to TV or whatever, to report on. Sometimes radio, sometimes larger Boston publications might jump in on it, like the Herald would be an obvious one. Tabloid newspapers often report this kind of stuff. However, none of those outlets did. And while you run a Cambridge publication, you do report on Somerville regularly. So, I mean, so is there a newspaper in Somerville that, like a newspaper of record anymore? I think you were discussing in your piece on this that, the Somerville Journal, as I've reported, as you're discussing, Somerville Journal is basically gone, right? Gannett, its corporate overlord, got rid of it, technically merged it with the Medford Transcript, but only online. And I think we all know that this is not real. They're not really reporting anymore. The Somerville Times doesn't have much more bandwidth than the Somerville Wire does. And Patch also doesn't have much bandwidth. They have one reporter that's assigned to Somerville. But mostly what they're doing is what they ultimately did. They took what you wrote and mentioned it, and that was their coverage, right? So, so I can answer this, but why is this problematic, Mark?
You called it 3 years ago when you began the Somerville News Garden project that Somerville was verging on a news desert, and people were skeptical. I think even I was sort of like, Somerville, the place
Right.
with multiple online and print publications that cover city doings. And you were completely correct in identifying the problem before it arrived, that Gannett bought Gatehouse, has millions or billions of dollars in debt to satisfy, and has done cost cutting that turned the Somerville reporter, editor, whatever the title was, into a quote regional unquote
Multimedia
writer.
journalist or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. And that means that there's no full-time person covering Somerville and can respond to immediate breaking news, or even news that was lying in a public space for several hours, by several hours later in the day.
And so how is said news then breaking? How did this news break? We both saw it. I saw it almost right away in the morning. And I'm like, we don't really cover that. I figure Fox News will be here any moment. But no.
The public talks. And in this case, it's social media that's taking the place of media. And there's a Davis Square Facebook group where people were talking about the body that was found.
Right.
And conjecturing, in this case, probably accurately, that this may well have been the result of an overdose and may well have been an unhoused person. Theoretically, some of that information could have come from someone passing through heavily trafficked Davis Square on the way to the T, or a bus, or on the way to a business, or on the way to work, who spoke with a police officer and was told, yeah, poor guy, it was an overdose. So that information that was on social media may have been 100% accurate, but
how do we know
they
that?
didn't, we don't know that.
Yeah.
Exactly. They didn't source the information. And even in this case, if it was accurate and reliable, there's going to be countless other examples when it's not, when it's really just conjecture or gossip or rumor.
And it's journalists' job to apprehend the truth. I mean, that's what we're trying to be, interlocutors for the public in the public interest, right? We're trying to figure out what is going on. So when someone drops dead in Davis Square, there's a bunch of questions like, let's think about, let's do this thought experiment of, you're a reporter in Wuhan, China, back in October or November, right, of 2019. And you start hearing from the local hospitals that a bunch of people are coming in sick with something that seems an awful lot like the SARS virus, from, 15 years previous or whatever it was, in around Asia, primarily Hong Kong. and people are dying, right? So you're realizing that there might be a public health crisis, and you try to report on it, but the local government officials, which they can do in China more than they can here, just stop news outlets from reporting on it. And then when independent reporters arise and try to report on it, many of them are jailed and have their social media accounts shut off by the government, which again can happen in China. But just bringing that over to here, I mean, how do we know what this person died of? We have some people on Facebook, basically, and I suppose Reddit. I didn't check the Somerville Reddit, but I'm sure people were talking about it there, and some other online spaces that people do chat and sometimes get quite exercised about stuff. Who's to say what was going on, whether it was serious or not? If it was an overdose, like what overdose of what? I mean, It could be something we're familiar with. Like lately, fentanyl ODs have been have been coming on strong, because just a couple grains of fentanyl can kill somebody, like especially on top of other meds, other drugs. So like, how do we know it's not something new? How is the community to adjudge what is kind of, I guess, normal, that someone may die, they may have a heart attack, whatever, they may be hit by a car, and what is dangerous? They may be murdered in a public space, or they may indeed succumb to some public health threat that we don't know about and need to know about, right? So then what does the city do? Like you kind of went around with Denise from the city. Like what was the city saying here?
The city belatedly released only the information that it was a medical situation, which again could mean almost anything.
Yeah.
Even getting stabbed in the middle of a square is a medical situation.
I imagine yes, it is.
But this could have been a heart attack. It could have been a stroke. It could have been an overdose. It could have been an overdose of various different kinds of drugs. The information couldn't be released according to the city because of HIPAA rules. This is a federal law that is basically you're violating my First Amendment rights, as used by conservatives. A total misunderstanding of what the law is.
Yeah.
HIPAA says nothing about the police or a city government being able to say what happened to someone, what the medical situation was, who the person was. This citing of HIPAA was just
off the wall,
wrong. It's
like
they're sticking to it as a fig leaf, but this is the kind of information that was produced regularly for decades and decades.
Yeah.
And this whole thing about it's for the privacy of the person who is dead is a canard. It's just
I have here an article by the Association of Healthcare Journalists from a few years ago. Journalists get guidance on navigating HIPAA rules, and HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it's about 25 years old. It really had to do with workers taking their health information from job to job and protecting said information in certain situations, as well as it's come to have other connotations. But only covered entities have to worry about HIPAA. And what are covered entities? Well, according to this article and according to the statute, health plans, self-insured companies, healthcare clearinghouses, collection companies, lawyers, hospital medical directors, and healthcare providers, right? And as a rule, this article specifically says that leaves out police officers, doctors who accept cash-only payments, patients, reporters, and one might say that any part of government that isn't directly named, in the law. Like the typical city government and the communications officer for said government is not enjoined by HIPAA to clam up about basic health stuff at all. And in fact,
that's correct.
If we as reporters quote a medical official that is covered who chooses to talk to us, we're not covered at all. Like we can still report it, no problem. And this happens all the time. So, and it has, as you say, it has nothing to do with anything here. Somebody's dropped dead. We're trying to report on this. You're trying to report on this.
I asked Denise Taylor to produce the statute that she was citing, and she did not.
Of course, she can't, because it doesn't say what she wants it to say. So
Yeah.
this is a problem. This is in and of itself something that, well, you've reported on. I may very well follow up on, at least with an editorial. But like, and as journalists, our yeah, ethics for journalists come from a number of sources. The Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics is one place, and it says, that ethical journalism is accurate, fair, and thorough, right? And that we're reporting in the public interest. John Merrill, this famous professor from University of Missouri, which is a big journalism school, said that the primary obligation of the journalist is to be free. Well, here we are, being free. We're operating in the public interest. We're trying to be accurate, fair, and thorough. And we're being stymied by public officials, including police, that are saying, no, we can't say anything about this. And okay, it may be nothing, quote unquote, or it may be something. It's not really for those officials to say, is it? It's,
No.
It's for us to ask and and to find out on behalf of the public and to report it to the public, and the public can judge what's important and what's not ultimately, right? So
even at the most basic description of what news is, which is sort of the new and unusual, Watch Commander Lieutenant Michael Holland told me that he couldn't remember the last time a body had been found in a public space in Somerville.
Yeah, it's not like a normal thing. It's not a commonplace. So it's news. I mean, both of us, we're both editors. We both report, have reporters out, and we report. This is news. This is something one reports. And I noticed people on Facebook, particularly, a couple people are like, news, ha, ha, ha. Okay. I mean, people can be like that if they want. They can make fun of the press for wanting to cover this. But for the reasons we've said, and for several reasons we didn't even bother to discuss, this is important. And we're both concerned, since we're both trying to fill well, the reason we have this project with my nonprofit, the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, called the Somerville News Garden, is precisely to help news bloom, to flower, where we're in danger of having a news desert, as you said, which is an expression that we use in the industry to discuss municipalities that no longer have professional journalists, trained journalists, right, who operate under codes of ethics like the ones we've mentioned. They no longer have those kinds of folks reporting on a regular basis, on happenings of the day, on debates of the day, like this, right? Like this kind of incident and the kinds of issues we're raising around it. And I think you were right to point out that this is a problem. This kind of highlights that problem. Stuff like somebody can just die and nobody says anything about it until you sort of say something about it to say that nothing's being said about it, in essence, and that we don't know what's going on yet, really. Right. And that the city's using kind of weird excuses for why they're not even mentioning it when it will ultimately appear in police logs. I mean, I'm sure we can look at the Somerville Times, which does report on police logs in a week or two, and probably we'll see that they've mentioned something specific. So, it's tragic anyway. I think some people are trying to infer or state directly that this is somehow unethical for journalists to comment on, or the city also was commenting on the photo that someone gave you, that they took on their phone, right, just while walking by, and there's this body lying there, and trying to say that this is somehow untoward, that
it violated the privacy of whoever was lying under that sheet in the middle of a public square.
This is false. I mean, this is something that each news organization decides for themselves how to do it. But I don't think either you or clearly, you definitely, me either, would think that showing, as you put it, this is like an occluded photo. It's at a distance. You can't really necessarily see like what it is real well, but it could be a body, right? This is not violating anybody's privacy. And if it was, again, the public's right to know and the public interest can trump individual privacy of a perpetrator in the case of a murder, let's say, or of a victim, or of someone who succumbs to an illness or overdose, right? There are times when these things are important to know. There are times when it's important to show pictures of a body, as indeed the global press did during tragedies like Hurricane Katrina. Bodies were shown. Journalists decide it's important for people to understand the gravity of the situation. That people going about their daily lives were mowed down by a natural disaster, and that bodies are floating around in the case of Katrina. This is a public health threat again, right? So how do you underscore this? Well, you write about it. But as we all know, I'm a photographer. I mean, a picture's worth 1,000 words, even now in the age of the ubiquitous image. So, there are times when we're going to do that. And in this case, it was not like some clear photo of a corpse at all, right? So I don't think either of us would
Denise
find
Taylor actually mentioned the inappropriateness of violating the privacy of someone under a sheet in the middle of a public square, actually before she'd even seen the photo, before she was aware that I'd even written about this.
This
I
is
just
a
told her,
misunderstanding. Yeah.
I just told her I'd been sent the photo, and her suggestion that the photographer shouldn't have shared it would have completely undone the news gathering process. I would never have known that there was a body in Davis Square if that person had not shared the photo with me.
Yeah, I mean, as a photographer, again, and someone who's taught photography at the university level, anybody taking photos in the US in any area that is public or can be seen easily from a public space that would not be assumed by anybody to be private is fine. There's no issues with this, And if a news organization wants to further occlude, in this case, an already occluded image, put something over it, they can certainly do that, but it's not required, and the city's just incorrect about this matter. So, I mean, I don't want to drag this discussion on. We've already gone pretty far, about 20 minutes, I think. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mark, before we
The
close?
last note I'd like to make is that although this may seem to some people like it is nothing, we don't know that it will always be nothing. Things that seem unimportant can form a part of a pattern later or have more significance later. In a neighborhood in Cambridge called the Port, we have numerous gunfire incidents where gunshots are heard, casings are found, but no one's ever hurt. The most that might happen is that a car is shot up or a building is scarred. No victims. Is it a big deal to report on? Well, it is once you begin to build a pattern of gunfire incident after gunfire incident after gunfire incident, and the cars that are damaged, and the buildings that are scarred, and the people who are woken up terrified in the middle of the night or early morning, it starts to wear on them, and you start to realize that it's happening in one neighborhood of the city and not in others.
That's right.
So incidents that seem unimportant can become an important part of the pattern.
It's the same here in Somerville, of course. And we just had an incident that basically went viral nationally and internationally, where some gunshots went right over went into a window right over the heads of a couple of children. What if those children have been killed? I mean, so it's serious no matter which way you cut it. And as you say, where such incidents happen matters too, because it tells us something. There's always something to report about that, like why in this neighborhood and not in that neighborhood. And so, and why is it unusual in Davis Square for a body to be found when we could say that at certain times in Somerville's history, finding bodies was not, that unusual or surprising. Bullet-riddled bodies, indeed. So all right. Well, thanks for chatting. And how might people support the Cambridge Day who may wish to do so who are watching this video?
Well, if they read Cambridge Day, I think that might be good for everyone. If they decide that eventually they want to donate, it's not tax-free, but a lot of people have been donating recently, and it's much appreciated, and it helps us build a better site and get more coverage overall. And I would very much like to try to do more in Somerville if the Somerville branded news sites aren't able to keep up.
Well, that's laudable, and thanks for all your work, of course. And if folks want to donate to the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, which helps our Somerville News Garden project, helps the Somerville Wire, initiative of that project, and a bunch of other stuff we're doing, and investigative reporting all over Massachusetts that we fund and then syndicate for free to outlets like Cambridge Day. Just go to Give to Binge, GIVEBINJ.org, and drop us whatever you can. We'd really appreciate it. So thanks, folks, and we're going to take off now. Bye.
Hi, Jason.